HOA. Karen says, Your dad doesn't make the rules in my neighborhood. HOA. Karen assaults disabled child on swing. She attacked a detective's daughter. The late autumn afternoon cast a warm glow across Maplewood Park as Detective Sarah Mitchell settled onto a worn wooden bench. Her eyes followed her 7-year-old daughter Emma, whose delighted laughter echoed across the playground. Despite the cerebral palsy that weakened her small legs, Emma's face radiated pure happiness as she soared through the air on the swing set. Before you watch this full story, please comment below and let me know which country you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more amazing true stories like this one. Merry Christmas to all of you. For Sarah, these Thursday afternoons represented everything good in her demanding life as a detective. After 16 grueling hours chasing down suspects and documenting crime scenes, watching Emma experience this simple joy made every difficult moment worthwhile. The swing set offered Emma something precious that her condition often denied her: a sense of freedom and possibility that transcended her physical limitations. Sarah captured a quick photograph on her phone, preserving the moment when her daughter's hair flew behind her and her eyes squeezed shut in pure delight. She planned to add this image to the growing collection on her refrigerator, a gallery celebrating Emma's happiest moments. For just a brief moment, Sarah closed her eyes and savored the sound of her daughter's joy, mixed with the scent of autumn leaves and freshly cut grass. Then everything changed in an instant. A woman's sharp voice shattered the peaceful afternoon. Sarah's eyes snapped open to see a tall, impeccably dressed woman marching toward Emma, with unmistakable fury blazing across her features. The woman's blonde hair was pulled back severely, and expensive jewelry glinted in the afternoon sunlight. Her expression seemed wildly disproportionate to anything happening in the quiet park. The woman, whose name Sarah would soon learn was Karen Hendricks, screamed at Emma to get off the swing immediately. Sarah began running, but the distance was too great. Time seemed too slow, as Sarah watched helplessly, while Karen grabbed Emma's thin arm and violently yanked her from the moving swing. Emma's terrified scream pierced the air as her small body crumpled to the ground, her weakened legs unable to break her fall. The sickening sound of her daughter's head hitting the rubber mat would haunt Sarah's dreams for years. Sarah reached her daughter within seconds, dropping to her knees and carefully gathering Emma's trembling body into her arms. Blood streamed from Emma's nose, bright red against her pale skin. Despite her maternal panic, Sarah's detective training kicked in as she methodically assessed the injuries. Emma's nose was clearly broken, a massive bruise was already forming where Karen had grabbed her arm, and signs of a possible concussion were evident. Through her tears and confusion, Emma kept asking why the lady had hurt her and what she had done wrong. Sarah held her daughter close, reassuring her that she had done nothing wrong while fighting back her own rage at the woman, still standing over them without a trace of remorse. Karen's explanation was stunning in its coldness. She claimed the swing had been reserved for her grandson, who used it every Thursday at 4 o'clock. She insisted Emma had been trespassing on private property and had refused to leave when warned. Karen showed no concern for the injured child, only irritation at what she perceived as rule-breaking. Sarah's blood ran cold as she informed Karen that she had just assaulted a 7-year-old child with cerebral palsy. Karen's response revealed her complete lack of empathy. She justified her actions by citing the Homeowners Association bylaws. She threatened to use her connections with the mayor and police chief to avoid consequences. When Sarah revealed her identity as a detective and promised that Karen would regret her actions, the woman laughed dismissively and threatened a lawsuit. As Sarah carefully carried her injured daughter to the car, she made a silent vow. Karen Hendricks had just made the worst mistake of her life. This mother and detective were about to use every skill and resource at her disposal to ensure justice was served. You might wonder how a single moment of cruelty could unravel someone's entire life. Stay with me, because what happens next will show you exactly how justice works when you hurt the wrong child. The emergency room physician, Dr. James Patterson, documented Emma's injuries with careful precision. The broken nose would take 6 to 8 weeks to heal. The concussion required constant monitoring. The bruising on her arm showed 5 distinct finger marks, clear evidence of excessive force used against a child. Dr. Patterson's assessment was sobering given Emma's cerebral palsy and more fragile bone structure. The assault could have resulted in her death. Beyond the physical injuries, the psychological impact weighed heavily on Sarah's mind. Emma barely slept those first nights, plagued by nightmares of falling and angry faces. She flinched when her mother moved too quickly and cried at the suggestion of going outside. The joyful child who loved the freedom of swinging now lived in fear that the angry woman might return. While caring for Emma during her leave from work, Sarah transformed her home office into a comprehensive investigation center. Her partner, Marcus, delivered security footage from the park, along with an extensive background file on Karen Hendricks. What Sarah discovered made her realize this assault was not an isolated incident, but part of a long pattern of abuse. Karen had served as president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association for 8 years. During that time, she had been sued 7 times by residents for harassment, discrimination, and abuse of power. Each case had been quietly settled with confidentiality agreements, allowing Karen to continue her reign of terror without public accountability. The cases revealed a disturbing pattern. Karen had reported a grieving widow to Child Protective Services because her lawn had grown too long, causing the woman to lose both her jobs and eventually her home. She had placed a lien on an elderly veteran's house over a mailbox painted the wrong shade of beige. She had banned a 12-year-old boy with autism from the community pool because his stimming behaviors disturbed other residents. What Sarah discovered next would transform this from a simple assault case into something far more serious. The evidence of Karen's crimes went deeper than anyone imagined. Case after case showed Karen specifically targeting vulnerable people, single mothers, elderly residents, disabled families, anyone she perceived as weak or unable to fight back. She wielded her small amount of power like a weapon, creating arbitrary rules and punishing anyone who questioned her authority. Then Marcus uncovered something potentially criminal. A forensic accountant had analyzed the homeowners' association finances and found evidence that Karen had embezzled over $200,000 during the past 5 years. She had approved security enhancements that never happened, submitted administrative expenses that went directly to her personal account, and billed for legal fees on non-existent cases. Additional investigation revealed even darker allegations. Multiple pets had died mysteriously in the yards of residents who had disagreed with Karen. While nothing had been proven, the pattern was suspicious. 3 pet owners were willing to testify that their dogs had died suddenly after public disputes with Karen, with one owner finding rat poison pellets in her backyard the day after Karen threatened to resolve a barking problem. Sarah realized she was dealing with someone truly dangerous, a person who hurt children, terrorized elderly residents, discriminated against disabled people, and possibly killed innocent animals. This was no longer just about getting justice for Emma. This was about protecting every vulnerable person who might cross Karen's path in the future. The criminal charges were filed on Monday morning with remarkable speed. The district attorney, William Garrett, watched the security footage multiple times, repeatedly expressing his shock that Karen had actually thrown a disabled child from a swing. He fast-tracked the case, issuing an arrest warrant that same day for felony assault on a minor, battery, child endangerment, and filing a false police report. The evidence of embezzlement was delivered to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the White Collar Crime Division opened an immediate investigation. Sarah's attorney filed a comprehensive civil suit seeking compensation for medical expenses, pain and suffering, emotional distress, and punitive damages. At Sarah's request, Marcus contacted every news outlet in the area and provided them with the complete story and security footage. Sarah wanted the public to see exactly what Karen Hendricks had done, even though it meant putting Emma in the spotlight. Other victims needed the courage to come forward, and the public needed to understand what unchecked homeowners association tyranny looked like. The arrest footage would soon be broadcast across every news channel in the state. But that was just the beginning of Karen's fall from grace. Karen's arrest occurred at her expensive home in Willow Creek. Officers arrived to find her in designer yoga clothes, a wine glass in hand, completely unprepared for what was about to happen. Even as they placed her in handcuffs, she continued screaming about her position and connections, unable to comprehend that her power could not protect her from consequences this time. The evening news coverage exceeded Sarah's expectations. The story led every local channel, with the security footage playing repeatedly. The image of Karen violently grabbing Emma and throwing her from the swing was impossible to watch without feeling outrage. By 8 o'clock that evening, the story had gone viral on social media. By 9 o'clock, reporters had uncovered Karen's history of lawsuits and complaints. By 10 o'clock, national news networks were covering the story of the Homeowners Association president who had assaulted a disabled child. Former victims began coming forward to share their own experiences. Margaret Chen gave a tearful interview about her dog Toby, whom she believed Karen had poisoned. Others described years of harassment, discrimination, and intimidation at Karen's hands. The public reaction was swift and furious. Within hours, Karen's attorney contacted Sarah's lawyer, offering $500,000 to settle quietly and make the case disappear. Sarah rejected the offer without hesitation. She did not want Karen's money. She wanted accountability, consequences, and a public record that would protect others. The morning after Karen's arrest brought an unexpected development. Sarah opened her door to find an elderly man and several others standing on her porch. They were residents of Willow Creek who wanted to thank her and provide statements about Karen's years of abuse and harassment. Throughout that day, 17 people gave detailed accounts of their experiences. Howard Chen described how his wife, Margaret, had fallen into depression after her companion dog died from suspected poisoning. Lisa Rodriguez explained how Karen had called Child Protective Services on her 4 times in 2 years, traumatizing her children with repeated investigations that always concluded with no evidence of neglect. An African-American family, the Johnsons, documented systematic racial discrimination in how Karen enforced rules differently for white residents versus people of color. The pattern was undeniable and extensive. Karen had terrorized an entire community for 8 years, targeting anyone she perceived as vulnerable or different. With these comprehensive statements, the case expanded beyond a single assault to demonstrate years of systematic abuse of power. News media descended on Willow Creek, and residents who had previously been too frightened to speak out now shared their stories publicly. A special investigative report detailed Karen's 8-year reign of terror, featuring interviews with numerous victims and documentation of the harm she had caused. Public outrage grew exponentially as more details emerged. As the trial date approached, Emma faced her biggest challenge yet. Could a 7-year-old girl find the courage to face her attacker in court? The answer would inspire thousands. Emma herself watched some of the news coverage and asked her mother why no one had stopped Karen before. Sarah explained that people had been afraid and that the system had failed them. Emma's response made Sarah's heart swell with pride. She said that when she grew up, she wanted to help people and stop bullies just like her mother did. Letters and cards began arriving from across the country. Parents of disabled children expressed gratitude for Sarah's stand. Disability rights organizations asked to use Emma's case to advocate for stronger protections. The story had grown beyond one assault. It had become a movement for change. 3 months after the assault, the trial began. Karen had pleaded not guilty, claiming she had enforced association rules, using minimal necessary force to remove a trespasser. The courtroom was packed with media, victims from Willow Creek, and supporters who came to stand with Emma. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. The security footage played on multiple screens, showing every horrific detail of Karen grabbing Emma and throwing her from the swing. Emma's screams echoed through the courtroom, and several jurors visibly flinched at what they witnessed. Dr. Patterson testified about the severity of Emma's injuries. Marcus described the thorough investigation. 17 residents of Willow Creek testified about Karen's pattern of targeting vulnerable people over many years. The evidence painted a clear picture of someone who had abused what little power she held for nearly a decade. Then came the most difficult moment in his testimony. Sarah's heart broke watching her small daughter, legs in braces, climb into the witness box with help. Emma wore her favorite purple dress with butterflies and held a stuffed bunny tightly as she answered questions. Emma's testimony was simple and heartbreaking. She described being happy on the swing, feeling like she could fly, and that her legs worked properly. She explained how the lady had yelled at her, grabbed her arm very hard, and pulled her off the swing. She described the pain and fear and blood, and how the lady had said kids like her did not belong there and should not be allowed in public spaces. The defense attorney tried to shake Emma's story, but her honesty and consistency proved impossible to break. Then came the evidence that would seal Karen's fate. The defense's cross-examination attempted to confuse Emma and suggest she had been causing problems. But the 7-year-old remained consistent in her account. She had simply been swinging, and nobody had asked her to leave before Karen grabbed her and threw her down. Karen testified in her own defense, claiming she had been protecting the playground for her grandson and acting within her authority as association president. Then the prosecution played a recording that destroyed any remaining credibility. Marcus had obtained Karen's phone records and found a voicemail she had left her daughter 2 days after the assault. In the recording, Karen complained about the disabled girl using her grandson's reserved swing. She said the child should be in a special home rather than out in public, where normal people had to see her. She bragged about filing a complaint against Sarah, and expressed confidence that her connections would protect her from consequences. The courtroom reaction was immediate and visceral. Several jurors looked physically ill. Karen's face went pale as she realized the damaging evidence had just been presented. Her attorney appeared defeated, knowing the case was lost. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Karen began crying, not from remorse, as Sarah noted, but from shock and self-pity that she was finally facing consequences for her actions. 2 weeks later, Judge Martinez delivered the sentence. As a grandmother herself, she looked at Karen with undisguised contempt as she spoke about rarely seeing such clear cruelty and abuse of power in her 30 years on the bench. Karen had violently assaulted a disabled child out of a sense of entitlement, shown no remorse, and terrorized an entire community for years. Judge Martinez sentenced Karen to the maximum 5 years in county jail, followed by 10 years of probation with strict conditions. She was ordered to have no contact with Emma or her family, banned from serving in any homeowners association or community organization, and required to pay $2.3 million in civil damages. Additionally, she was ordered to complete 500 hours of community service working with disabled children, under supervision, with the hope that she might learn basic human compassion. The judge also recommended that federal prosecutors pursue maximum penalties on the embezzlement charges. Karen was led from the courtroom sobbing, her cries echoing through the halls as she finally faced the full weight of her actions. But Sarah's mission was not complete. The real victory would come from transforming tragedy into lasting change that would protect children for generations to come. 6 months after Karen's sentencing, Sarah stood at a ribbon-cutting ceremony for a newly redesigned park. The city had dedicated significant resources to creating Emma's Place, an inclusive playground with equipment accessible to children of all abilities. There were ramps instead of stairs, sensory play areas, wheelchair-accessible swings, and quiet zones for children who needed breaks from stimulation. Emma stood next to the mayor, holding giant scissors and grinning from ear to ear as the mayor spoke about how public spaces belong to everyone. Every child deserves to experience joy and feel welcome, he said, though the lesson had come at far too high a cost. As Emma cut the ribbon, children of all abilities rushed onto the new equipment. Their laughter filled the air, while Sarah watched her daughter climb onto an adaptive swing designed specifically for children with mobility challenges. Emma's face radiated the same pure happiness Sarah had witnessed that terrible Thursday afternoon. But now she was truly safe. The impact extended far beyond one playground. The state legislature passed Emma's law, requiring all public playgrounds to include accessible equipment. Homeowners Association reform legislation added oversight and limits to prevent future abuses of power. Karen's case became a teaching example in law schools about the dangers of unchecked authority. The Willow Creek Homeowners Association was dissolved entirely, with residents voting to eliminate it and return to standard city governance. The oppressive rules were erased, families moved back, and the community began healing from years of Karen's tyranny. Margaret Chen got a new rescue dog named Justice, who regularly visited Emma, bringing joy to both the elderly woman and the young girl. Lisa Rodriguez's children played outside freely, without fear. The Johnson family became community advocates working to address racial discrimination in homeowners association enforcement across the state. One by one, Karen's former victims reclaimed their power and rebuilt their lives. As Christmas lights began appearing in neighborhoods and the spirit of the season filled the air, Sarah reflected on how far they had come. This holiday season felt different, filled with genuine hope and the knowledge that their struggle had created meaningful change. Emma's 12th birthday party was held at Emma's Place playground, surrounded by friends laughing and playing together. Her cerebral palsy still presented daily challenges, but she had grown into a confident, articulate young person who dreamed of becoming a disability rights attorney, fighting for people who needed help, just like her mother. At the party, a teenage boy approached Sarah and introduced himself as Bradley, Karen's grandson. He explained that he had been kept away from his grandmother because of her toxic behavior, and the swing had never actually been reserved for him. He wanted to apologize to Emma for the lies his grandmother had told that resulted in her injury. When Sarah introduced Bradley to Emma, her daughter studied him thoughtfully before smiling and inviting him to play modified tag with her friends. As Sarah watched the children run off together, she felt tears of hope and healing. The cycle of cruelty had been broken, and the next generation was learning compassion and inclusion. That evening, as Emma curled up beside her mother on the couch, she asked whether Karen had ever gotten better or felt sorry for what she had done. Sarah admitted she did not know if Karen had truly changed, but what mattered was that they had prevented her from hurting anyone else. More importantly, they had transformed something terrible into something good, a playground that had helped hundreds of children, and a law that had protected thousands more. Emma confessed that she still sometimes felt scared when she saw angry-looking strangers or visited new places. Remembering that terrible day, Sarah validated those feelings as normal responses to trauma while pointing out how far Emma had come. She was not letting fear control her life anymore. Later that night, standing at her window looking out at the peaceful neighborhood decorated with twinkling Christmas lights, Sarah reflected deeply on justice, revenge, and the fine line between them. She had wanted to destroy Karen Hendricks completely, and in many ways she had succeeded. Karen had lost her freedom, her reputation, her power, and her wealth. Everything she had built over 8 years as Homeowners Association president had crumbled in a matter of months. But as Sarah stood there watching the holiday lights reflect off the snow, she realized the real victory was not in tearing down one cruel woman. The true triumph was in lifting everyone Karen had tried to push down. Sarah had built something lasting and meaningful, a safer community where vulnerable residents no longer lived in fear, stronger laws protecting people from abuse of power, accessible spaces where children of all abilities could experience joy, and a daughter who knew her worth and refused to let the world diminish her spirit. Text messages brought encouraging news that underscored the scope of their impact. The last payment of the civil judgment had been processed, with the full $2.3 million deposited into a trust fund for Emma's college education and future medical needs. Emma would never have to worry about affording the care, therapies, and education she deserved. Another message from Marcus reported that Emma's law had just passed in 3 more states, bringing the total to 15. Her daughter's legacy was spreading across the country, protecting children she would never meet, and creating accessible playgrounds in communities hundreds of miles away. Sarah walked quietly to Emma's room and stood in the doorway, watching her daughter sleep peacefully. No nightmares troubled her rest tonight, just dreams of possibility and hope. The Christmas lights from outside cast a soft glow across Emma's face, making her look even younger and more innocent than her 12 years. Sarah whispered to her sleeping child that they had accomplished what they set out to do. They had made sure Emma and every other child like her would know they belonged everywhere and anywhere, always welcome to experience the simple joys of childhood without fear or discrimination. As Sarah prepared for bed herself, she realized the consuming anger that had driven her investigation and legal battle for months had finally faded completely. In its place was something far more valuable, a profound sense of purpose, genuine peace, and the unshakable knowledge that one mother's love combined with one little girl's courage had genuinely changed the world for the better. They had not just punished one person for wrongdoing. They had created systemic change that would protect countless children for decades to come. This Christmas season reminds us that light can emerge from even the darkest circumstances, that love is infinitely more powerful than cruelty, and that standing up for what is right even when it requires tremendous personal sacrifice can create ripples of positive change that spread far beyond what we can initially imagine. The holiday season also brought unexpected moments of grace and reconciliation. Bradley, Karen's grandson, had become a regular visitor at Emma's Place playground. He volunteered there twice a month, helping children with disabilities navigate the equipment and ensuring everyone felt included. His presence represented the possibility of breaking cycles of cruelty and choosing a different path than the one modeled by his grandmother. Emma had befriended him easily, demonstrating a capacity for forgiveness and compassion that amazed everyone who knew her story. Margaret Chen brought her new dog, Justice, to visit Emma regularly, and their friendship blossomed across the generations. The elderly woman who had lost so much to Karen's vindictiveness had found healing in building something positive with the young girl whose courage had finally stopped the abuse. Lisa Rodriguez's children played freely at Emma's Place, no longer afraid of complaints or investigations. The Johnson family had successfully advocated for stronger protections against racial discrimination in homeowners association enforcement, turning their painful experience into meaningful reform. Sarah received letters throughout December from families across the country, thanking her for Emma's law and sharing stories of how accessible playgrounds had changed their children's lives. Parents described watching their kids experience joy and inclusion for the first time. Therapists reported significant improvements in children's confidence and social development when they could play alongside peers without barriers. The ripple effects of that terrible Thursday afternoon in autumn had spread wider than Sarah could have imagined. On Christmas Eve, Emma asked to visit the playground one more time before the holiday. Sarah bundled her daughter in a warm coat and drove to Emma's Place as snow began to fall softly. The playground was empty in the evening twilight, decorated with lights that made it look magical. Emma went straight to the adaptive swing, the same type of swing where everything had changed years ago. Sarah pushed her daughter gently, watching Emma's face transform with that same pure happiness she had witnessed so long ago. But this time, there was no fear, no anxiety about who might approach or what might happen. Emma was safe here. Every child was safe here. That was what mattered most. "Mama," Emma called out as she swung through the crisp winter air, "I'm flying again. Just like before, but better now, because I know nobody can take this away from me." Sarah felt tears freeze on her cheeks in the cold air. "That's right, baby girl. This is yours. This is everyone's. And it always will be." Karen Hendricks had tried to break Emma's spirit on a swing set one autumn afternoon, driven by entitlement, prejudice, and cruelty. Instead, she had unknowingly unleashed a movement that would protect vulnerable children for generations to come. Sometimes, the most powerful form of justice is not revenge, but building something beautiful and enduring from the ashes of cruelty. Sometimes, victory means ensuring that no child ever again feels unwelcome in a public space designed for play, joy, and the simple happiness of childhood. And sometimes a mother's love, combined with unwavering determination and the courage to stand against injustice, becomes the most powerful force for change in the world. As families gather this holiday season to celebrate love, compassion, and togetherness, Emma's story serves as a profound reminder that we all have the power and responsibility to stand against cruelty and create a more inclusive, compassionate world for everyone. The Christmas lights at Emma's place shone brightly that evening, a beacon of hope and possibility in the winter darkness. Sarah watched her daughter swing higher and higher, her laughter ringing out across the snow-covered playground. This was the sound of justice. This was the sound of healing. This was the sound of a future where every child, regardless of their abilities or circumstances, would know they belonged. And as the snow fell gently around them, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that their fight had been worth every difficult moment. They had not just won a case. They had changed countless lives and built a legacy of protection, inclusion, and love that would endure long after the Christmas lights came down and spring returned to transform the world once again. As winter deepened and the new year approached, the impact of Emma's case continued to expand in ways Sarah had never anticipated. The story had captured the attention of national disability rights organizations, legal reform advocates, and community leaders across the country who saw in Emma's experience a catalyst for broader systemic change. In January, Sarah received an invitation to speak at the National Conference on Disability Rights in Washington. The organizers wanted her to address lawmakers, advocates, and families about the intersection of accessibility, discrimination, and community governance. Sarah hesitated initially, uncomfortable with the spotlight, and worried about exploiting Emma's trauma for public attention. But Emma herself convinced her mother to accept. "Mama, if telling our story helps other kids, then we should tell it," Emma said with a maturity that belied her young age. "That's what heroes do. They use their hard times to make things better for other people." The conference took place in early February, and Sarah brought Emma with her to the nation's capital, standing before an audience of hundreds. Sarah shared their journey from that terrible afternoon in the park through the legal battle and ultimate victory. She spoke about the importance of accessible public spaces, the dangers of unchecked authority in community organizations, and the vulnerability of disabled children who depend on adults to protect rather than harm them. Emma sat in the front row, and when Sarah finished speaking, her daughter joined her on stage. The audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Afterward, dozens of families approached them with their own stories of discrimination, exclusion, and mistreatment. Parents shared tearful accounts of their children being denied access to playgrounds, pools, and community spaces because of disabilities. Others described harassment from homeowners associations that targeted their families for having disabled children who did not fit narrow definitions of normalcy. Sarah listened to each story with the focused attention of a detective gathering evidence. She took notes, collected contact information, and promised to connect these families with legal resources and advocacy organizations. What had begun as one mother's quest for justice for her daughter was evolving into something much larger. Network of families supporting each other and working together to demand systemic change. The conference led to an unexpected opportunity. A prominent senator who had attended Sarah's presentation reached out about drafting federal legislation to provide stronger protections for disabled individuals in community spaces and to establish oversight mechanisms for homeowners associations. The proposed law would create mandatory training for association board members, establish clear limits on their authority, require transparent financial auditing, and impose significant penalties for discrimination against disabled residents. Sarah found herself traveling to Washington multiple times over the following months to provide testimony and consultation as the legislation took shape. Marcus covered for her at work, and her captain continued to support her advocacy efforts. recognizing that her work was advancing justice on a scale that extended far beyond their city's jurisdiction. Meanwhile, something surprising was happening with Karen Hendricks. Her court-ordered community service working with disabled children at a therapeutic riding program was having an unexpected effect. The program director, a woman named Dr. Helen Martinez, who specialized in equine therapy for children with physical and developmental disabilities, reported that Karen had begun showing genuine engagement with the children, rather than simply fulfilling her obligation. Sarah learned about this development through the Victim Services Coordinator, who monitored Karen's compliance with her sentence. Initially, Sarah was skeptical. She doubted that someone with Karen's history of cruelty could genuinely change, and she worried this was manipulation designed to earn early release or public sympathy. But Dr. Martinez requested a meeting with Sarah to discuss Karen's progress. The conversation took place in Dr. Martinez's office at the riding facility, surrounded by photos of children beaming with joy atop gentle horses. "Detective Mitchell, I understand your skepticism," Dr. Martinez began. "I have worked with many court-ordered volunteers over the years, and most simply go through the motions to complete their hours. Karen was exactly that way for the first several months. She was resentful, distant, and clearly believed herself the victim in all of this." Sarah's expression remained neutral as she listened. "But something shifted about 4 months ago," Dr. Martinez continued. "We have a young girl in our program named Sophia, who has cerebral palsy, similar to Emma's condition. Sophia is also 7 years old. One afternoon, Karen was assigned to help Sophia with her writing session, and I watched something crack in Karen's facade. For the first time, I saw her really look at Sophia as a person rather than an inconvenience or obligation." Dr. Martinez pulled out a folder containing Karen's written reflections, which were required as part of her community service. She wrote about seeing Emma and Sophia, about understanding, perhaps for the first time, that Emma was not an abstraction or a rule violation, but a real child with thoughts, feelings, dreams, and a family who loved her. She wrote about the fear in Sophia's eyes when she first approached, and how it mirrored what she now remembers seeing in Emma's eyes before the assault. Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions as she read Karen's words. The reflections showed someone genuinely grappling with the harm she had caused, acknowledging the privilege and entitlement that had blinded her to the humanity of others, and expressing remorse that seemed authentic rather than performative. "I am not asking you to forgive her," Dr. Martinez said carefully. "That is not my place, and Karen has no right to expect forgiveness from you or Emma. But I thought you should know that your decision to have her work with these children, rather than simply sending her to prison and walking away, may actually be creating the kind of genuine transformation that prevents future harm. She is learning empathy through direct contact with the children she once saw as less than fully human." Sarah took the folder home and shared its contents with Emma, believing her daughter deserved to know about Karen's apparent change. Emma read through the reflections carefully, her face thoughtful. "Do you think she really means it, Mama?" Emma asked. "I honestly do not know, sweetheart," Sarah replied. "People can change, but change is hard and rare, especially for adults who have spent years behaving a certain way. What I do know is that even if Karen has genuinely changed, it does not undo the harm she caused to you and so many others. And our decision to pursue justice was right, regardless of whether she eventually feels remorse." Emma nodded slowly. "I am glad she is learning to be nice to kids like me. Not because it helps her, but because it means those kids are safer. That matters more than whether she feels bad about what she did." Sarah pulled her daughter close, amazed once again by Emma's wisdom and compassion. "You are absolutely right, baby. That is exactly the right way to think about it." By spring, the federal legislation that Sarah had helped shape was gaining momentum in Congress. The Accessible Communities and HOA Accountability Act, informally known as the Emma Mitchell Act, had bipartisan support and was expected to pass both chambers. The law would fundamentally change how homeowners associations operated across the country, establishing federal oversight requiring accessibility standards, prohibiting discrimination, and creating mechanisms for residents to challenge abusive practices without facing retaliation. Sarah was invited to stand beside the president when the bill was signed into law in May. Emma stood next to her mother in the rose garden, wearing a dress covered in butterflies, as the president spoke about the importance of protecting vulnerable Americans and ensuring that every child had access to the simple joys of childhood, regardless of their physical abilities. This young lady and her mother have shown us that justice requires courage, persistence, and an unwavering commitment to protecting those who cannot protect themselves, the president said, gesturing toward Emma and Sarah, because of their bravery. Children across this nation will grow up in communities that welcome rather than exclude them, that accommodate rather than discriminate against them, and that recognize their fundamental human dignity and worth. As the president signed the legislation, cameras flashed, and Emma squeezed her mother's hand tightly. Sarah looked down at her daughter and saw tears streaming down Emma's face, not tears of pain or fear, but tears of joy and pride in what they had accomplished together. The signing ceremony was followed by a reception where Sarah and Emma met other families who had advocated for the legislation. They heard stories of children who would benefit from the new protections, parents who would no longer live in fear of harassment from their homeowners associations, and communities that the requirements for accessibility and inclusion would transform. One mother approached Sarah with her teenage son, who used a wheelchair. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "For 15 years, I have fought to get our community pool modified so my son could use it. The HOA refused every request, citing costs and claiming it was unnecessary. Because of this law, they will finally have to make those changes. My son will get to swim with his friends before he graduates high school. You gave us that." Sarah embraced the woman, feeling the weight and responsibility of what they had set in motion. This was why the fight had been worth it. This was why every difficult moment, every painful memory, every sleepless night had mattered.